Hello, my name is Grian and welcome back to another episode of Build School. Now, well over 2 years ago, I did a Build School on roofs, you may very well remember, but I did a very basic overview with some very basic designs. Today I've got 10 designs to show you with a bit more complexity involved. Somehow that video has 1.2 million views and I only showed like 5 very basic ideas. So today we're going to go over a few more. But before we start, I want to show you just how important roofs are to a build by removing some from some of my old builds. This is a build that I made last year for Halloween. It's probably one of the builds that I'm most proud of. It's got a slightly bigger scale than I normally build at, but most importantly, the roof is very, very important on this one. So to kind of get my point across on how important roofs are, I'm actually going to remove this one and all the details that are surrounding it, and we'll take a look at what it looks like. I have no idea either, so let's just pop this away for a second. I think that's most definitely proven my point. This looks pretty bad without a roof. Even if we put just like a flat surface on the top here, it's just not gonna cut it. It's not gonna cut it at all. I know that this stripe was technically part of it, but you get the idea. Roofs really make or break a build. So let's go back and take a look at the many different kinds that you can try and explore and find the one that works best for your build. I'm gonna put this back the way it was. Better. Much better. Okay, let's move on, shall we? Okay, so now we know how important the roofs are, let's have a quick mosey on through. So, what I've done, basically, is I've googled the different types of houses, because I'm not an architect, I don't know all the terminology, I just build in Minecraft and I know what looks good in Minecraft. So I kind of googled real-life examples and learnt all the names and stuff, and I've replicated some of them in this episode of Build School today, but I've also come up with some sort of Minecrafty ones that don't really exist in real life. So there's a bit of a crossover between reality and the game. So this first one is probably a recap of the first episode I did to do with roofs. This is Gable and Dormer. So a gable is basically what I was calling an A-frame, very similar. Anyway, so it's kind of this big A shape on the side of a building and it's got a pretty nice overhang. The other thing is a dormer, which is this thing. The roof is interrupted by a smaller triangle. Usually you'd sort of see this involved here, where this triangle is sort of set back, but I've got a very small example here. I only want to give small examples for this video so that it's much easier to kind of take on board. So I've actually put 3 different techniques, so to speak, in this particular example, maybe even a few more. So, right, we've got the gable, which we know. We know this A-frame, and then we know the dormers because I've gone over these before. If you don't know, basically it's what we all do with staircase, upside down staircase, 1 block over the edge, and also I've put a cobblestone outline with a spruce sort of body to this. So that's the simple bit. On this side, I've added a couple of variations where this is just a full block. So instead of using staircase, I've just added a full block, and this is totally fine. It is a cheaper way to do it if you have limited resources. This is like 1/4 of the cost of doing this. So I would definitely recommend using full block if you are limited. The only other thing is if you've got windows in the wall, you might want to create a bit of shape around it, and that sort of bleeds into the roof a little bit when you sort of make an outline using the cobblestone into that. And you can use, you know, different blocks for whatever. So that's just a little recap of your standard style roof, and that's called a gable and dormer. This is the gable, that bit's the dormer. Right, so let's move on to some more of the Minecrafty stuff. So this didn't really have a name. I was looking up the examples and stuff. So this is just a flat roof. And you can make flat roofs. Like if we removed all of the sandstone bit, you would just see a big old block of wood. And that's fine. You can decorate that in certain ways like I have here. So the key behind the balustrade is by having layers. Now, all of these bits are 1 block out. They always have 1 block out from the wall. The next thing that's important is having a gap. So on this side, I've produced no gap. And it does look okay, don't get me wrong. This does sort of work. But in my opinion, it works even better if you've got a little bit of gap, so it really looks decorative. And you can even accentuate this by making this gap here not wood. You can make this a different color, and that way you really distinguish the roof from the rest of the body of the building. You can also add little bits underneath with staircases, and that's just the overhang bit. Once you get up here, you want to create a high enough balustrade, which is kind of just like a barrier or a fence or whatever, and make it so when you're sitting on the floor or standing on the floor, you can still see it. So that might mean making it 2, maybe even 3 blocks tall. And I've just done this by placing a staircase on the bottom and a staircase on the top, and they just go really nicely flush, and it looks really nice. But unfortunately, using this technique, you are limited because you can't actually go much more than that on this side. Now, the other thing that I want to point out is that I am using very, very small examples here, so you might want to consider using this kind of build on a larger scale, something a lot bigger than this, because as you can see, it really dominates, and it's not supposed to. It's just supposed to be decorative. Okay, so that's just the flat roof with the balustrade. Hopefully you took something away from that. Remember, slabs and staircases are your friend, and you can even make sort of more of an overhang if it's really big. So the further you go out, the more noticeable it's going to be. So let's move on, and we're going to build on this. Sometimes, instead of having the balustrade, we're just going to have the Mansard Roof. Now, that's the technical term. This is basically sort of your European style roof. Now, all of these include the sort of the overhang with the detail that we normally have, i.e. like this, and I've even done the same thing with the staircases. I've even used sandstone, and again, you could whack in a different color behind this if you want to make it stand out that little bit more. That also is fine. But the main part here, the main difference is this bit, made out of grey concrete, and I've used grey concrete because it's the closest color to what we see in real life with the slate and that kind of thing. So the key one here is the shape goes up and over. It doesn't go directly diagonal. You can see if I just draw a diagonal line, this bit juts out. Now, because I've built this at such a small scale, it's hard to get that really perfect rounded shape. And the rounded shape is supposed to only go in these corners. One of the key things here is to make sure you go 2 blocks up at a time. 1, 2, 1, 2, and then you finish off with a further 1. That's the sort of style you want to go for. If you're at a bigger scale, you might want to up that to 3, and so on and so forth, depending on how big you build your buildings. So for this sort of scale, or, you know, taller, bigger, wider, you'd want 2, then 2, and then 1 at the top. And then once you've done that, you can then add in a bit of shape. So if I remove the shape here, it does look pretty flat, and you could keep it like that. But I've just knocked out a couple of these blocks instead of having the corners like that, because these corners here, especially at this scale, it's so obvious that there's just the real rigid right angles there. So I've just knocked out the blocks in the corners, and that's given it the shape that it needs. And then you can also add in the middle of this to give it a bit of a sort of false perception of a curve. I just added a couple of blocks in the middle there as well. So that is the Mansard. Roof. Moving on, we recently covered this in our style video. This is called the Irimoya Roof. Now, I didn't actually know the name of this. I actually googled the Japanese style of roof, and they've got their own whole different world of architecture. Like, all of the names of their stuff is so complicated. So I'm only going to cover this one, is the Irimoya one, and this is the one that I kind of covered in the style video. So the keys here are the very distinct outline, putting in the fences in the corners, and the main thing is that these arches go from a slow burn and then they arch up pretty quickly. So they're very gentle, gentle, gentle. So I've used slab, 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 and then to staircase, which will bring it up a lot quicker. So there's sort of 2 halves to that one, and obviously the larger you go in scale, the more complex it's going to have to be with working out how many slabs to staircase you're going to need. And then behind it, you're going to need to put yourself some white concrete or some other block to give it a bit of color. The key here is to make sure you have these frameworks that go all the way round, and these corners jut out a little bit. I've obviously had to make this a little bit simplified because it is a very small build here, but hopefully you can kind of get the idea. Now, if you're struggling with this one, because it is a particularly difficult roof to get the hang of, I'd recommend Googling Japanese roofs, and it would be it's surprisingly easy to copy it once you have the image in front of you. Okay, moving on. This is the same roof that I made for the Haunted Mansion that we saw earlier, and this is just a mansard variation that I could see. So I saw both of these on sort of Google Images when I was looking them up, but in Minecraft, in my opinion, this one is slightly different to this one. So the key over there was that it sort of goes up and over to the right. This one sort of dips under before going up. So a little bit kind of like the Japanese style, where it starts slower. And so instead of doing the 1, 2, 1, 2 kind of style that we did there, the 2 up, 2 up, 2 up, this one starts with 1, 1, and then it goes up to 2, 2. So it's kind of the inverse of the mansard roof we did over there, and again I'm using grey concrete. The other things that I've done, so it's all the same style, just the inverse. So you start 1, 1, then up 2, 2. The other thing that you can do with this one is the overhang here is a bit more prominent. So this is a much wider build than all the others, because I wanted to show you that you can do a slab and then another slab, and then that's where you put your details in afterwards. Now, the reason for this is because if this was set one block closer to the wall, this roof wouldn't sit very well at all. This roof needs a large footprint. It needs to spread out. So this bit of block needs to sit one block over from the wall. So having it just one block out, or just giving it a bit of spread, really helps a lot. The final thing to talk about here is that I added sort of a iron fence thing on the top. Now, this is purely decorative, and it costs a lot of iron, especially as it's made out of cauldrons and anvils, and then iron fence to top it off. But it's a really nice way to decorate the top of these kind of roofs, to give them that extra bit of height, to give it that extra bit of shape and detail. So you alternate between cauldron, anvil, and then you put a cobblestone wall on top of the cauldrons, and then iron fences on all of them. And you can sort of vary that at all. Like, this is a very similar one to the one I did with my haunted house, so go and check out that tutorial if you want to know more about this particular style. Moving on, now it wouldn't be much of a video if we didn't talk about the modern style. Now this is just modern flat. This was kind of on the example sheet at the start, but I wanted to talk about it anyway. So let's pretend that this is a coffee shop, because it kind of looks like it. You have your main bit, which is attached to the floor. The roof is actually attached to the floor directly. Unlike everything else, which is sitting on top of the walls, this is actually a load-bearing part of the building. And this is a very, very simple design, essentially. The key thing here is that, again, it's one block out or 2 blocks at the side. You can sort of mix it up a little bit. But it's also attached at one side, or you could even, you know, do the whole modern thing where you do an S shape or something like that. But the key thing here is that it's just flat on the top. There's nothing extra to it. You can make it a bit more interesting by adding a block of iron, if you so wish. If this is a particularly big build, you could detail it just by making what looks like an air conditioning vent on the top, because those do exist in real life, and you could even add an antenna with iron bars. So there are ways of detailing this if you want to sort of make it more realistic, and it won't impact it too much. From the bottom you can't even see the air conditioner, but if you were to be flying around, you would see the little details that you've put in as well. So let's move on. Now these are more sort of house-styled roofs. So this one is called the Skillion and Lean-To. So it's a very simple one, and it also dictates the shape of the house a little bit. So this is to do with the 2 sides. You've got one big main mass, and then you've got a secondary mass here, and then you've got a very simple slab roof, and it works all the way from the right to the left, meeting at the top, and it overhangs as all of our builds certainly do at the moment. There's nothing really special about it other than it's just slabs, but I will say that if this massive mass here is too wide, this will look incredibly silly, so don't go too big on this sort of thing. And then on the secondary mass, we're just mimicking it and attaching it to the main wall. And then when you look at the pair of them together, it looks quite nice. So you could imagine that having, you know, once you've got your details in, this house would look really, really nice. So that is just another idea for you. Moving on, we've got sort of a traditional barn look, and this is called a Gambrel. And this is actually fairly easy to create, and you might have seen this multiple times. It does look like a barn. So the idea is that it goes up at quite a steep angle, and then it goes a bit shallow at the top. So I've done this with a staircase, then a block, staircase, block. That's the sort of thing you might expect on your sort of Viking style house, but instead of going all the way to the top with that style, you quickly smoothen off by using slabs until you get to the middle, and then you replicate the other side. Again, I've used a different colour for the overhang to the middle part, and I was trying to replicate a roof. We don't have a really red block that we could use with staircases and slabs, so nether brick had to do. But you can see it produces quite a nice shape, and this is great for any sort of barn work or any kind of house out in the forest kind of thing. I think this works really, really well. Moving on, we've got my least favourite, and I'm not afraid to say it. I only put this in because I saw it in so many real-life examples. This is the butterfly roof, and it basically looks like a V. So it's kind of like that one over there. It slabs all the way in the middle, works its way up in a V shape with an overhang on either side. There's really not that much to say about it. It works well with modern builds, I suppose. And you could even make an M shape if you wanted to, so you could do one, two, yeah, you get the idea. But it's really not my cup of tea. But if you guys are looking at this and you think, oh, that's cool, fair play to you, go and give it a try, see if you can make this work for your build. So we'll move swiftly away from the butterfly one. This is the jerkin head, and this is sort of a Nordic style, I believe. I've seen lots of examples of this, and essentially it's just like the gable from earlier, except you reach sort of near the top and you just immediately flatten it off with some staircase. And what you do is you create a little diagonal that goes inwards towards the center of the building. And this is particularly helpful if you have a really, really wide build and your big A shape is going to be absolutely massive. This helps make the top of it not seem like it's going into space. So it sort of just smoothens over the edge. So from this angle, we still see that A shape, but you can just see that it ever so slightly gently curves over, and it makes it a softer roof overall. And from the side, it also has quite an appealing shape. So you can use that as a little trick if you've got really, really big A-frame roofs that you want to smoothen up. And you could even bring this down a block or two, depending on how big your roof is. So, moving on to the very final one of today's episode is the hip and valley. This is very common in suburban houses, and instead of having your A-frame or your gable or whatever you want to call it, you have your staircase go all the way round and you just work your way up. You work your way up until you get to the top, and that creates almost a pyramid-like shape. Now, it's called hip and valley because we have a primary mass here and we have a secondary mass. And the idea here is that it connects in the middle. So if we look from the top, this bit connects to our central bit, and it's just that little bit shorter. You want it to be one block or half a block just shy of your primary mass, just so that it doesn't become too dominant. And that with that connection, it creates this diagonal within the roof, and it helps center the eyes where it's supposed to look. And this is a really cool way of making your roofs. It's a very simple way. You can't really go too far wrong as long as you start one block over the edge, because as you can see, not a very attractive thing when it just sits on the top. And then you just work your way round. If you do it systematically, you shouldn't come into any problems. If you have a one block center, you will just have to put a spruce slab on the top instead of a staircase, otherwise you have this little problem here. Whew, so that is 10 roof designs to show you in Minecraft. Now, I've gone over a bit more detail than in my first episode that I'm a little bit ashamed of now. So just try and take some of these in, and I hope you do realise just how important roofs are, and I know that roofs are a thing that people really struggle with in Minecraft. So hopefully this has broadened your horizons, hopefully you'll try some of these out, and don't be afraid to experiment. All of these are obviously slightly different styles from one another, whether you're going for your average Minecraft house with all the little tricks involved there, or if you want to go slightly bigger and you work on the Mansard, or maybe a totally different culture and you go the Japanese style, or modern. Hopefully I've done a bit of everything here and sort of the suburban section down here. I hope there's just something here for you today, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you very, very much for watching. Goodbye.